Hey everyone, Jennifer Lee Chan here from NBC Sports Bay Area with your Friday update. 49ers have to shore up the defensive line, and Daniel Jeremiah, who is NFL draft expert for NFL Network, had a 3-hour conference call. I listened to the entire thing, a lot of different questions about a lot of different players. But as far as the 49ers go, when they're looking at potentially shoring up that defensive line, especially at that number 11 pick, if this is what they're going to do, there are a couple players that Daniel Jeremiah does think. He does think that they will fit into the 49ers defensive line room, what Chris Kasarik wants from players immediately. So one of the players that he thinks would be a great catch if he were to fall just a little bit to that number 11 position, it is Mason Graham out of Michigan. Mason Graham is a huge dude. He's 6'3", 320 pounds, and he's PFF's number 4 overall prospect. So I don't know that if he's going to fall to the number 11 position to the 49ers, but stranger things have happened. There could be a run on, defensive edge rushers. And so that's, who jumps ahead of the 49ers, or maybe they move up a little bit. But Mason Graham is a guy who, in his 3 years at Michigan, and he didn't transfer, he was at Michigan the entire time. He lined up predominantly in the B gap, and he had 12 sacks, 17 hits, and 47 hurries over 3 seasons. This is what Daniel Jeremiah said. While they're picking at 11, they're going to be able to get a really good player. Now, he also did say that this draft class is very stocked with a lot of defensive tackles. So he said, I'm curious. One thing we talked about him as one of the top players in this draft, it's Mason Graham. I'll be curious to see how he goes through the spring. As I mentioned, I think his tape is so good, but I'm not sure he's going to totally ace the spring part of it, which is interesting. If you're looking for someone who I think would be a home run pick for them, though, what's the dream scenario? To me, it would be if Mason Graham were to fall down to them where they could scoop him up and pick him up. So I don't know what he necessarily means. And, when we head to the combine, I'll maybe ask him a little bit more details on what he actually meant by not playing as well in the spring. So we'll see what happens there. Um, but at Michigan, he had 108 tackles, 60 were solo, and 18 for a loss over his 3 years. So really good against the run. He's a guy who can also get pressure on the quarterback, and I think he's a guy that could immediately make an impact if he's drafted by the 49ers. Another guy who may allow the 49ers to move back a little bit in the draft and still get a really effective defensive tackle is Walter Nolan. So he's from Ole Miss, and Daniel Jeremiah said, he's a great scheme fit. This is what he said. The player that is a great scheme fit for them, which I think would be more of a trade back than taking him there at 11, would be Walter Nolan. With all of their jet front and they like to play up the field with Chris Kasarik, they really want to get off the ball and penetrate and go. So he's really twitched up. Walter Nolan would be someone to me that maybe if you slid down a little bit to get a little more value, that would be a defensive tackle that would really be a fun fit for that group. So looking at defensive tackle, they're letting Javon Hargrave go. He's going to test the open market. Maybe they figure out, a way to make it work financially for both parties. Maybe he's back next year. I don't know where he goes. So it is a potential that he does return. The door is not shut. They'd like to have conversations with him going forward. But looking at the interior, they have Jordan Elliott, Malik Collins, Kalia Davis, and Evan Anderson. They need to add more. And obviously, we haven't gone through free agency yet. So it's kind of weird that free agency happens after the combine and then it's the draft after that. So we're kind of jumping ahead to look at who they could pick at the end of April. But of course, free agency is going to happen before that. So, um, but Daniel Jeremiah repeatedly said there are enough defensive tackles. Last year was an offensive line draft. This is a defensive line draft. There are a lot. They can get a value pick maybe later on in the second round, maybe day 2, second or third round, and then they could take a skill player like a tight end, like Tyler Warren, like Matt Maiocco said, at that number 11 position. Tyler Warren, though, is also ranked a little bit higher than where the 49ers pick, so I don't know whether he would fall to them at 11 or where they'd have to move up to get him. But they are needing to get a tight end, defensive interior. I also think they have to get more guys in that wide receiver room. While Ricky Pearsall has shown that he has a ton of potential, I don't know that he's necessarily a wide receiver one. Brandon Ayuk, when is he going to be back? We don't know. Guys that tear their ACL generally aren't 100% or feeling like themselves until a year out. And he tore his ACL in week 7, so I just don't think he's going to be ready for week 1. Nick Bosa was ready about 11 months after his injury, but not everybody's Nick Bosa. Also, Nick Bosa kind of had a clean ACL tear, not a lot of other damage that happened there, and he bounced back. He's also a different type of position player. He's an edge rusher. Wide receivers do have to be able to change position, change direction much more quickly. So when is Brandon Ayuk going to be ready? We don't know. They have Jacob Cowing, who's probably like a wide receiver three. So Jawan Jennings, obviously, he stepped up into the position of wide receiver one. But I really think they need to get a veteran receiver in the group, and that's going to happen during free agency. I don't know where it is. I listened to Tim Kawakami's podcast, and he was thinking Tyler Lockett might not be a bad guy to kind of have that Emmanuel Sanders effect. I mean, when Emmanuel Sanders came to the 49ers, it really bumped up the production of that group. He is a complete professional. He, you know, really changed how Debo Samuel approached the game, how all of them did, and I think it really made a difference. Now, Chris Conley is a guy, he could be back. That's a guy who's a vet, but he's not a guy who's had a ton of production. So maybe Cooper Kupp, maybe Tyler Lockett. Those are guys that the 49ers need to look at in free agency that maybe wouldn't break the bank, but would definitely add some veteran flair and production to a group that is really without Debo Samuel there, without Brandon Ayuk there for at least, I think, the first month of the season. I just don't think they can count on him for a ton of production. And we'll see how it goes. But generally, guys that come back from a catastrophic injury like that, it takes them a while to feel like themselves out there. So, with that being said, a skill player could happen in that first round at number 11, but it also could be, they take a defensive interior lineman, which is what Daniel Jeremiah talked about, and there are a ton of them. And, with the defense playing well, it takes pressure off the offense, and that's what the 49ers are going to need going forward in 2025. All right. I'm actually headed to the Bay Area for my dad's birthday dinner, so I will try to do an update tomorrow, maybe earlier in the morning, but then I'll be back with you on Sunday before I head to the combine. I'm starting to dig deeper into who's going to be there. 3 hours of conference call with Daniel Jeremiah. It was actually pretty insightful, lots of different things. Of course, 49ers are not going to be interested in a quarterback coming out of the draft, so there was a lot of talk about those guys, but defensive line, this is the draft for them. The 49ers are going to definitely go there at some point in the draft, and we'll see where it is coming up. All right, everybody have a good weekend. Chat with you soon.